Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network. Any opinions or comments made by any guest are their own, and they do not necessarily reflect any of the presenters or network's opinions.
This man in the saucer, can you describe him?
Well, sir, he was small and skinny. He had his head was pointed, came to a very sharp point. He had long green hair. His eyes were a sort of purplish red. He had large ears which were formed like an antenna. His teeth were perfect, but spread far apart. And I noticed, too, a jacket of some sort of spun glass and bright red metallic hues.
You say this all took place in a few seconds. Mr. Nagelschmidt, can you tell me what color tie I'm wearing?
I'm sorry, sir. I didn't notice.
You mean to say you can remember everything about this man from the spaceship, his hair, the color of his eyes, the clothing he was wearing, and yet, after all this time, you can't tell me the color of my tie?
But you didn't come out of a flying saucer.
Hello, this is Ronald Kinsella, and you're listening to the Paranormal UK radio network, the UK's biggest paranormal network, and this is Paranormal Dimensions with David Young.
Hello and welcome to the show. Thank you for that introduction, Ronald. As always, if you'd ever like to get in touch with me, my email address is davidyoung2qn@yahoo.co.uk. That's davidyoung2qn, all one word, @yahoo.co.uk. Now, today's guest on the show is author and researcher David Halperin. Now, before we go into the show, I must make a little bit of an apology. Somehow, for some reason, we had a little bit of a gremlin at the beginning of the recording, and it kind of missed off where I say hello to David, and he says hello back. And I then asked him about the title of his new book, Intimate Alien, The Hidden Story of the UFO. I asked how he came about the title, and I got an answer that I wasn't quite expecting. Basically, his first sentence is, UFOs are an emblem of death. And this is where we'll pick up the conversation with David. Once again, I apologise to both you and David, but I'm sure you'll find everything that David says both thought-provoking and very interesting.
An emblem of death, both individually and collectively. And death is the most alien thing we can conceive, and also the most intimate, that it is born within us, bone of our bone and flesh of our flesh, grows with us, is with us until we cease to exist. And yet that state of non-existence is something too alien even to be conceived. I tried to convey this paradox with the title Intimate Alien.
Yeah, I understand what you've got. You've got to be a skeptic to, because things need to be proven, don't they? I mean, I understand exactly where you're coming from there. But you, like you say, you're not a disbeliever, you're a skeptic, so things need to be proven to you. That's kind of what you're meaning, isn't it?
Not exactly, because I am a disbeliever. I don't believe they exist physically.
Right.
But I don't dismiss them as bunk. I start out the book by saying that my starting point is that UFOs are a myth. But I don't mean by that what you might think I do. We normally use myth to mean bunk or nonsense or something that's not true. I use it the way Carl Jung used it, and Jung's work on flying saucers is one of the inspirations for my own approach. When Jung spoke of myth, he spoke of something that was not false, but the most profound truth of all.
Okay. So is that actually linked to religion in any way? Because we do hear, there's a lot of, if you like, UFO type reports in the Bible, etc. Is this kind of the direction we're going in here?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
I would say UFOs are essentially a religious phenomenon. That a UFO encounter is a bona fide religious experience. And UFO lore is a religious myth that allows those of us who haven't been privileged with a direct encounter to partake of the experience.
See, I can go by my own experience. I mean, I did mention to you that just before we started the show, I did actually see a UFO in the night sky in 1960s. I don't think it was 66, 67, something like that. And it was a big oval orange object. So, my seeing that, what does that mean?
I don't know. I mean, you are the one deep down who knows. Okay. What did it mean to you?
Well, it took me completely by surprise to see this thing going across the sky, and I have to admit I felt a very warm feeling from it, but it was definitely a real object going across the sky. I don't consider myself to be a religious person, although I do believe in spirit. Obviously, you know, I do believe in we do go on after in the afterlife. I don't know where that takes you.
Well, I hope very much that that's true. I have to say I find it very difficult to believe.
You do?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I've spoken to many people who are mediums and psychics, etc. I've had quite a few on this show, and they're the type of people that I believe. You know, I don't believe that they're lying, that things have... And also, I mean, I've explained it a couple of times, my wife had a near-death experience a long time before I knew her, and she actually died about, I think it was 2 or 3 times on her way to the hospital, because she's got asthma. And she saw the light, and she chose to come back. So, apparently, she was given that choice.
I mean, I've heard many stories like that, and they do impress me. They do impress me. I mean, clearly, you know, this is near-death experience is not something that I personally have researched, but it's clear to me that it's a real phenomenon. Whether it points to something actually beyond the grave, I don't know. And I sometimes find myself wondering, would it make any difference? That is to say, let's imagine that just for, I don't know, chemicals firing in our brain at the last moment of conscious existence gives us the sense we're entering a realm of light, and then we cease to exist. Would that be any different from the experience of actually entering a realm of light?
Yeah, that's what you're saying. No, there is the theory that there are these chemicals that was it endorphins that spark around in the brain and give you these imaginations. But then you get reports of actually people feeling that they leave their body and that they can look down on what's going on and see things that they could only see from above. I mean, how would you kind of explain that?
I can't, and I don't know how many cases of that sort there are. And I've heard of one where someone saw something on the roof of the apartment building, and I don't know how well documented that is. I've not looked into it, and if it is, then really that is a kind of smoking gun. But I'm just cautious because I have to tell you, I want so badly for that to be true that I've got to be very careful that my wishing doesn't determine my accepting.
Yeah.
But certainly I'm open to it.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, it's one of those things we are not going to find out until the time when we pass over, or not be the case. I mean, some of us are going to get a shock, aren't we?
Yeah. Or else you get enough of those smoking guns. I don't know. I mean, I did a blog post on, was a review of Sam Parnia's book, whose title now escapes me, something about near death. And Lord, I've lost my train of thought.
I thought I'd lost you for a moment.
Yeah, no, you got me. I'm trying to locate what I was trying to say. That yes. Okay, that people are skeptical of the near-death experiences, do provide physiological explanations for them, which are all more or less speculative. Okay? And I found myself thinking of the epicycles. Do you know what I mean by the epicycles?
No, not really. Perhaps you'd like to explain a little bit.
Yeah. Remember that for many centuries, the authority on astronomy was Ptolemy.
Yes.
Okay, the ancient Greek, and that the Earth is, first of all, the Earth is round. The ancient Greeks knew very well. Even the size of the Earth came pretty close to it. And we're at the center of the universe, and the sun and the moon and the other planets all revolve around us. And this astronomy worked very well for centuries. You could do really impressive things with it, like predict eclipses. And just that there were a few little things that didn't quite fit in, like every now and then a planet would go in the opposite direction from the way it was supposed to go. And the Ptolemaic astronomers, they tried to find explanations for it. And one they came up with was epicycles that say Venus goes around the Earth and it should go in a continuous circle, but every now and then it doubles back on itself, and that's called an epicycle. Now, from the perspective of the 21st century, we can see that all of these were last-ditch attempts to rescue a model of the universe that it worked really well, except not well enough. And the Copernican model, in which the sun is the center of our system and we revolve around the sun, works much better and is indeed the truth. So I found myself thinking, when scientists try to find explanations for the near-death experience, is this the equivalent of the epicycles? A last-ditch attempt to save a materialistic model of the universe. Do you see what I'm driving at here?
Yeah, I think I do, yeah.
Instead of, that eventually, we may find in another 50 or 100 years, look, these don't work at all, and some new Copernicus or equivalent of Copernicus, comes up with a theory of consciousness in which we are immortal. And which is just as scientific as the materialist paradigm. It's just a more advanced kind of science. And then, I imagine sometimes a science class of the 30th century where the kids are saying, what? You mean they used to think that consciousness just disappeared when the body dies? Did they think that the energy in the body also just vanishes? Well, no. They knew that the energy persists, but they didn't grasp yet that consciousness persists. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
So we may, for all I know, the NDEs, the near-death experiences, are the threshold of some new science of human consciousness, which now we can't imagine, and we stick with the materialist paradigm because that's proven its utility 10,000 times, just as Ptolemaic astronomy did in its day. I mean, if you can predict a lunar eclipse, boy, you really know how the universe works.
I mean, let's look at from a psychic medium's point of view. What are they actually seeing then? Do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'm in the materialist paradigm, and I'm going to have to say from the materialist paradigm that they are fakes, or they're in some way deluded.
Right. Okay.
But now I'm going to say maybe that we can accept a paradigm provisionally while recognizing that it is just a paradigm and that in 50, 100, 200, 500 years, I don't know how long, it may be discarded. And our science teacher will have to explain how people could have been so dumb as to not realize that consciousness survives death.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, I have to say, I do know several people that they're convinced that they are seeing people on the other side, or getting senses of people on the other side. And all I can say is that I believe their word. I know that I don't believe they're lying to me, but I can see what you're saying from a skeptic point of view. You've got to be skeptic first. You can't just jump in and say I believe in everything that you're told. You've got to look at it from with UFOs, ghosts, anything like that. You've got to see, find an answer to what it is a normal answer. I can see exactly what you're saying, because the unfortunate thing is we can't prove anything, can we?
Well, what we can do is we can come up with a paradigm, an explanatory model that makes sense of as much of the data as it can, and if it leaves a few things out, if there are a few loose ends, we may just have to say, we'll call it epicycles. We're not going to junk a system of astronomy that's been around for 1,000 years and that's worked really well. And now that this guy Copernicus has come along, he offers us a better option.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to stick with the materialist paradigm till somebody offers us a better option. Now, in a way, we've sort of gone from UFOs to life after death, which is perhaps the more important existential question, but it also raises all sorts of problems that UFOs don't raise. That is, how is it possible for perception to exist without the brain?
Talking about the religious aspect, the Bible, there are so many occurrences within the Bible which kind of goes along the route of UFOs and mediumship and all sorts of other paranormal occurrences. How would you explain those?
Well, let's make some distinctions.
Okay.
That, to me, the UFO in the Bible is the vision of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
And that's described in the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel. I have a I have a number of Bibles about 10 feet away from me, and if necessary, I'll go over to the shelf and pull one down. But we'll just describe that Ezekiel sees a great wind come out of the north, a fire flashing up. Out of the midst of the fire come 4 living creatures, each one with 4 faces, an ox, a lion, an eagle, and a human, and each has 4 wings. And then while he's looking at the living creatures, he sees a wheel on the earth, and then they seem to be 4 wheels
within a wheel,
in the sky, and it says that their appearance was as a wheel within a wheel, and we don't know what he means by that. And as for their rings, they were high and they were dreadful, and their rings were full of eyes round about. And then above the living creatures, above the wheels, there is what he calls a firmament, a sort of solid platform. Above the firmament, there is a throne. Sitting on the throne is a figure half of fire and half of something called chashmal, which in modern Hebrew means electricity, but I'm assuming that's not what Ezekiel meant. It's not quite clear what he did mean by that. And then it'd be interesting if he did mean electricity, wouldn't it? Yeah, it would be fascinating. The word is translated, its Hebrew is chashmal. It's translated in Greek as electron, in the old Greek translation of the Bible. And that's where we get our word electricity from, and that's why the shapers of modern Hebrew chose chashmal to be electricity. But, who knows? Anyway, then the being on the throne begins to address Ezekiel, and, if we're thinking Ezekiel sees a UFO, meaning a spaceship, then you'd expect some sort of cosmic revelations. Instead, no, Son of Man, I send you to the house of Israel, a nation of rebels who have rebelled against me, they and their fathers, to this very day. And it gives Ezekiel a set of quite parochial messages to the wicked children of Israel, which is a bit of a come down. Now, I still think that what Ezekiel is describing is a UFO, but remember, when I say UFO, I don't mean a spaceship, because that's not what I think UFOs are. Right. I've already told you that I think that they don't exist physically. There's something that comes from inside us. And that's something I think Ezekiel encountered, something from inside him, which he conventionalized in the religious language of his times as being a revelation of the ancient Jewish God, and which when we read it, our instinct is to conventionalize it in 20th, 21st century terms as a spaceship. But both of these are conventionalizations. I think Ezekiel genuinely encountered something that he didn't understand, could not identify, that all the interpreters who've tried to explain it have not been able to identify, and this includes the modern interpreters who make it a spaceship. And here I would look to Jung, that Jung sees all sorts of archetypal patterns in Ezekiel's vision, and he suggests that a true archetype, and perhaps we can talk a bit more about what I mean by archetype, what Jung meant by archetype, that a true archetype can't be explained. It can only be encountered. And that's what I think Ezekiel experienced.
I'd like you to go deeper into that if you'd like to.
Well, I don't know that I can with Ezekiel, but I would give you a contrast to something else that's been called a UFO.
Okay.
In the Bible, and that is the chariot of fire. In the story in 2 Kings, in which Elijah and his disciple Elisha are walking by the way, and a chariot of fire comes down, picks up Elijah, and carries him away. And a lot of people say, okay, that's a UFO. I would say no. That's an IFO, an identified flying object. Because within the ancient Israelite worldview, there was nothing puzzling about it at all. That God dwells in heaven, like an earthly king. He's surrounded by his chariots. Psalm 68 says, the chariotry of God is 2 myriads, thousands of Shinan. We don't know what Shinan are, but the point is fairly clear, that God has got his chariots around him, and naturally a fiery deity will be surrounded by fiery chariots. And no wonder, it's no great puzzle if he detaches one of those chariots to carry his prophet from the earth. So in the ancient Israelite worldview, what Elijah's fiery chariot was no more baffling, no more unidentified than a jet plane would be in ours. Now, granted, they don't exist, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that an ancient Israelite hearing that story, which obviously I take to be a legend, that would say, I know what that chariot is. But what Ezekiel sees seems to be beyond all conventionalization.
Because we see a lot of TV shows like Ancient Aliens, etc., which are quite convincing, because there do seem to be a lot of ancient buildings and things that we would have trouble building today. Or do you not see it that way?
Yeah, but I mean, our ancestors were pretty bright people, and given that they had a huge supply of dispensable manpower, they could do things that we can't.
Yeah, I mean, but the manpower. But do you think that the actual tools themselves would have been up to what they needed to do by pulling those rocks, the stones, which are hundreds of tons, I think even thousands of tons in some cases, would ropes and sticks and pulleys and things, actually do that job?
Yeah, I think that the people who've researched, the Egyptologists don't find any problem in that, and my old friend Ed Meltzer, who published an article in Fate magazine about these things, describes that we've gotten from ancient Egypt a school exercise in which young engineers are being trained to deal with problems like putting up the pyramids. Yeah, I mean, I think Prettianica has a number of different arguments. One is the supposed impossibility of putting up these grand structures, and another is the pervasiveness of certain ancient myths and legends. And that's the part of his argument that I get interested in. That where he says, for example, that the legends, the myths and legends of all peoples refer to giants. So the giants must have existed. And my own response to that is, yeah, the giants did exist. When we are 6 months old, we are attended by giants who pick us up when we're crying and feed us when we're hungry. And those memory traces are going to remain.
Yeah.
And that is what interests me, how those memory traces are transformed into powerful myths that seem inherently true.
This kind of leads me on to another thing. If UFOs were kind of the thing of our imagination, why have militaries all over the world spent so much time and money investigating them?
That I would find a fairly simple question. That we can't swear to it that they're imaginary, and as long as there are different militaries that are potentially in a state of war with each other, you've got to make sure that an enemy country is not infiltrating your airspace. And I think from the beginning that was the agenda of the various Air Force projects investigating UFOs. That when we have to look at a bit of history here, that the modern UFO era began in 1947, right, when Kenneth Arnold, the private pilot over the Cascade Mountains, saw 9 objects skipping like saucers over water, and the press turned that into flying saucers.
Yeah.
And by the way, that sighting has never been explained. And this is going to be one of my admissions, that I acknowledge there are UFO sightings that we have not been able to explain. Okay, now that became if you dig out the New York Times from back then, that it was front page news for days that people were seeing these flying saucers. Why was it so important? Was it because they thought we were being visited from outer space? Not at all. The concern was that when World War II had ended, not only did we grab a whole bunch of the Nazi scientists to work with us, including some fairly shameful people like Werner von Braun, to work with us in developing our space program, but the Soviets had done the same. So who knew what stuff the Soviets might be sending to us?
Yeah, I can see that.
And that you just have to rule out that possibility. So that question I do not find at all troublesome.
Right.
But remember, the negative part of the argument is not what really interests me. The negative part is, okay, we don't have machines flying around the skies. The positive part of the argument is, then what are people experiencing? And most crucially, what do those experiences mean to them and perhaps to the rest of us? Because one of the things that this is the pivot of my book, that the UFO is a vessel of meaning.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, that we see, we experience, we believe in UFOs, or we deny and disparage UFOs because they mean something to us that we either are drawn to or that repel us. And this is one of the reasons why I'm not only interested in why some people, such as myself when I was younger, and actually myself now, are irresistibly drawn to the idea of UFOs, but also why some people so vehemently reject them. I mean, you know the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, who is very much against UFOs. I mean, I can send you a link if you want to a YouTube video in which he disparages UFOs, and he is twitching, bellowing, gesticulating. This guy is somebody, the UFO means something to this man, which he absolutely rejects. And I say it as that this is the emotional attachment that the believer has to the UFO, only with a minus sign attached.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder how he would react if he saw one himself. The same as many people are caught out by surprise suddenly by these things.
Well, I almost can answer that question, David, believe it or not. That because there is, do you remember the whole business, I think it was back in 2015, of the Roswell Slides?
Oh, yeah, I do. Yep.
Okay, for those of your listeners who are not familiar with that, let us, that these were a number of slides that were discovered, left behind by a rather formidable lady of an earlier generation. Her first name is Hilda. I can't remember her full name.
No, I can't.
And they show a kind of a weird human-like creature. Now, as a matter of fact, we know what that human-like creature is. That it is a mummy of a 2-year-old boy that was kept for, I think, from 1938 down to the 1947 in the Museum of the Mesa Verde National Park. And Hilda and her husband were inveterate travelers, and they took lots of photos. Those were the slides that survived, and they took a few photos of this mummy. I mean, the slides are, some people have said the slides are fake. They're not fake. They're perfectly genuine pictures of a human mummy. Okay. For reasons that are not rationally, don't make much sense, but I think psychologically do, a lot of people who saw these pictures decided that they were aliens possibly from the Roswell crash. Even though if you look at them without any preconceptions, it's clear that they're human. And a fellow named Adam Dew was making a movie about them called Kodachrome. I don't know if the movie ever got made because the whole thing blew up in his face before he had a chance to make the movie. But he did manage to buttonhole Neil deGrasse Tyson in what seems like a what do you call it, an indoor shopping mall. And you gotta imagine the scene. I suppose Tyson is walking along wondering, can I go into Victoria's Secret without anybody seeing me, or something like that, where am I going to find ski poles or something like that? And along comes this Adam Dew, and he shoves under Tyson's nose a photo of this mummy. And Tyson says, okay, so maybe this is a real-life alien that landed. Fine. Come back when you got. And then he doesn't answer the sentence. He doesn't finish the sentence. Because how could he finish it? Do you see what I mean? That once he's granted that this is likely to be a photograph of an alien, what more could Adam Dew possibly have produced? You see where I'm going?
Yeah.
So now we know that Tyson, the inveterate debunker, seeing a photo that in retrospect and with sound, more or less calm judgment, we know is just a human mummy, his mind jumps to an alien. And he says, yeah, fine, maybe it's an alien that landed. Can you imagine what an admission that is?
Indeed, yeah. I mean, and
so that
I was going to say, but also quite a few people jumped on the bandwagon, didn't they? Like people like Jaime Maussan and a few other serious UFO investigators were taken in by it.
Yeah. I mean, and one who wasn't was Kevin Randall, right? That Randall was clear from the beginning that this was not a space alien. And he says, it was obvious, he says, and I would just change that to it should have been obvious. But what I would say is that there was something that overrode our rational awareness that this was a human child. And that's what interests me, the something. That, to me, is the real UFO, the real unidentified object, which is not physically real, but psychically real.
Yeah. And besides those photos, we had the case of the fake alien mummies as well, didn't we? Where,
the alien autopsy.
And also, and in addition to that, the alien autopsy. Yeah.
I mean, the photos to me are more interesting because they're not fakes. Nobody tried to create them in order to fool people into thinking they were Roswell aliens. So, a traveler, a woman traveling in, I suppose, around 1945, saw, this is an interesting museum exhibit, took the pictures. It's only later that they were discovered, and that association, which made no logical sense, but made powerful psychological sense, was made.
Yeah, I mean, but do you feel that some people try to make money out of it? Because I do understand that some people made millions out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to grant that, but my sense is that ufology, on the whole, is not a particularly lucrative profession.
No, it's not. I know that.
So, the people, I mean, did Adam really believe that these were space aliens? My inclination would be to say, yeah. In retrospect, he should have known better, but he didn't. And lots of others didn't. Like, there's a YouTube video in which he shows the photos to passers-by on Michigan Avenue, I think, in Chicago. And one of them says, "Oh, look at that oval face, those big eyes." Now, if you look at the photos, the face is not oval, and there's nothing odd about the eyes. But she's projecting onto it the image, which we could talk about more because it's a fascinating question, the image that came into existence, at least into our conscious awareness in 1987 with the publication of Whitley Strieber's Communion, of that alien face.
Yeah, the grey.
With the hue, though actually in the cover it's beige, it's not gray. But the face is sort of an old-fashioned light bulb. The eyes are huge, and if you think about it, they're anatomically impossible. There's no way that somebody could have, eyes like that they would, the orbs would crowd each other out.
Yeah, the large eyes. So do you feel do you feel the greys don't exist then? Or these type of aliens?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they don't exist, not physically. But there's something inside us that, as I put it in the book, that when the human mind looks into the darkness, this is the face it sees staring back. This is why, I don't know if your listeners know about the Prettianica Mask. That it's not really a mask, it's a sculpture of a human being wearing a mask. It goes back to about 4,500 BCE. Was found near Pristina, the capital of Kosovo in the Balkans, and it shows a face very much, not absolutely identical, but strikingly like the face of the alien on Communion.
Yeah.
And there's no way to say that aliens landed in prehistoric Kosovo, because that face, you can put it very comfortably within the development of the art of this culture. I can't remember the name that we give the prehistoric culture, but it's as if that is, when we look into the darkness, this is the face we see looking back. And this is why this, to me, is the most amazing thing about Whitley Strieber's book, that many thousands of people wrote to Strieber saying, I've experienced those creatures.
I did, yeah.
I'd forgotten, but when I saw your book, I remembered.
And they still do, apparently.
Yeah.
But you think it's something within them?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting concept that I've never actually thought about. Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say. So, as far as the Roswell incident itself, how do you feel? What do you feel happened there?
Okay, let me start out by saying that I wish I could believe in the Mogul Theory. Because the Mogul Theory is a very elegant explanation for what happened. Before I talk about the Mogul Theory, that I will say that the initial accounts of Roswell describe some sort of odd debris that no one could quite identify, but that was plainly earthly. I mean, they speak of Scotch tape. They speak of flowered tape. It's clearly not intergalactic spaceships. And that it did turn up on a ranch, I think about 80 miles north of Roswell.
Yeah.
Nobody at the time reported corpses. We don't hear a single word about corpses until 1978.
Didn't Mac Brazel actually report some beings?
Don't think so, no.
At that time?
No. Nope. All he described was this sort of tinfoil-like junk lying around his ranch. Wasn't a word about beings.
Oh, well, I maybe misunderstood the story, but I thought he said someone mentioned something about little green men, and he said something about they weren't green, they were grey.
Not that I can remember. If you got a reference, send it to me.
Yeah, sure, I'll have to dig into that now, because he was actually taken onto the base and he was kept there for a number of days, and apparently when he came out he had a brand new vehicle and I think he left the area, but it seemed like he was given some hush money of some sort and sort of sent on his way.
I think that's part of the legend. I don't think that he was kept on the base. I think that he reported his discovery supposedly after a few weeks that the stuff had been lying around, although to me there's problems with that also, to the sheriff's office and the sheriff of Chavis County, and the sheriff's office notified the people on the base, who then issued, and this is to me one of the more baffling parts of the story, they issued a press release saying that the many rumors about the flying disc, this was shortly after Kenneth Arnold had his sighting, the many rumors about the flying disc became reality yesterday when the intelligence office of, I think it was the 508th Bomb Group, came into possession of a landed disc. Worth noting, it didn't say crashed. Landed disc through the cooperation of a local rancher and the sheriff's office. And then about the press release announced that whatever this was being flown off to Fort Worth to higher headquarters, and then at Fort Worth, the high military higher-ups said, oh, this was just a weather balloon. Now, what the Mogul theory is that, yeah, it was a balloon, but not a weather balloon. It was a balloon used in a top-secret espionage project called Project Mogul, where the aim was to detect, to send to send send balloons up to the edge of the stratosphere to detect Soviet nuclear activity, and that one of these balloons came down on Mac Brazel's ranch, and that will explain why nobody recognized it. It wasn't an ordinary weather balloon, and it will explain why the military suddenly got very defensive and hush-hush, because this was a top-secret project. And I love that explanation. It's elegant, it's persuasive, it just has some really bad problems.
Well, they've actually changed their story a few times over the years, haven't they?
Well, I think they've settled on Mogul, that Mogul is the official one. The problem is that there was a finite number of flights, and most of them were traced to places other than Roswell. And the only conceivable candidate for what might have been the Roswell object was a Mogul balloon flight that, as far as we can tell from a contemporary diary account, never flew. So the Mogul theory has some really bad, there's some really serious objections to it. So I don't know what that stuff was that came down. It was clearly something of earthly manufacture. I don't know what it was, and I think the reason why the military got so excited about it at the beginning and took it so seriously was that they knew perfectly well it was a balloon. But did we know that it was one of ours? How did we know that there wasn't a nest of Soviet spies across the border spying out our military installations?
I'm sure there were.
And,
back then, the Cold War.
Yeah, at least it was plausible. In the context of 1947, it was plausible.
Yeah.
But there are still a number of loose ends. So the question of what exactly the stuff was, I don't know. And I also remain puzzled as to why the military initially announced it was a landed disc. No matter how you slice it, it wasn't a landed disc.
Yeah, they tried to squash it within 24 hours, didn't they? Like it was released, and then they just did everything to squash it.
Yeah, but then why did they think it was a landed disc? Brazel never claimed to have found the disc. All he claimed to have found was these scraps.
Parts,
And for some reason, and this is another baffling part, he says he found it back in June, and I don't know why he would have let it lie around his land where the sheep that grazed there were bound to eat it and make themselves sick. So that's also a loose end. Now, where the story gets really interesting to me is long afterwards. That in 1978, the first traditions, and using the old, my background is from biblical Judaic studies, that using all the language of our discipline, I would call them traditions of the dead aliens, and they start to surface in October of 1978 when Stanton Friedman, the ufologist whom we lost about, I think it was 2 years ago, that Friedman gave a lecture, and a married couple approached him and said, we heard a story from a friend of ours who's now dead about how he saw a UFO, not at Roswell, but a few hundred miles to the west. He saw a UFO crashed, and he found the bodies of the pilots. And that is where, to me, the story gets exciting. That's where it stops being a banal mystery of fallen debris and becomes a profound and gripping myth of mortal divinity.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to meet Stanton, actually, when he came over here. And he was highly respected. And then he's highly missed, too.
Very much.
Go on to the Majestic 12, which he was very deeply involved in, researching. How do you feel about that, or do you not know much about it?
Everything that I've seen leads me to think it's a forgery.
You do, but it's one of those things that it's probably we'll never know.
Well, there is one very remarkable feature about it, which is that one of the secret conclave, the people who are in the know, was Donald H. Menzel.
Mm.
And those of us who do not follow MJ12 know Menzel as an extremely eloquent and passionate, who's a professor of astrophysics at Harvard, know him as an eloquent and passionate debunker of UFOs. He wrote 3 books on the subject. The first 2 of which were quite impressive. The third, which I think was written when he was already quite ill, was really just a rehash of his older stuff. But I mean, Menzel is another person who fascinates me in that he's a skeptic. No, I won't even say a skeptic, because I'm a skeptic. He's a debunker. He says it's all nonsense. And when he calls it myth, he doesn't use that word the way I do in the Jungian sense. But if he's so convinced it's all nonsense, then why does he bother to write 3 books about it?
Yeah.
And why does he have the habit of doodling pictures of little aliens, which he did? There's an emotional engagement with the UFO going on in this professed debunker, no less than in the professed believers. And that, to me, is the real UFO mystery. What is going on there?
Indeed, yeah. Well, you have to go back to... you wrote a book in 2011, I think it was, called A Journal of a UFO Investigator. And it's got quite an intriguing cover. I've actually got it in front of me, but I actually haven't had a chance to get around to read it yet. So, could you perhaps cover a little bit about what that entails?
Okay, it's... if you read it and you read Intimate Alien, you realize that the first chapter of Intimate Alien is entitled Confessions of a Teenage Ufologist, which I was. And that I put my teenage ufology in the context of growing up in a house with a young, dying mother. That my mother had a heart condition which eventually took her life when she was 46 years old. And I describe this story in Intimate Alien more or less the way it happened, and I connect that I see that as the context for my fascination with UFOs, which obviously has not faded. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written 2 books about UFOs. Earlier, I tried telling that story in a fictional form, and Journal of a UFO Investigator is a novel, and it is rooted in the same reality that I describe in Intimate Alien, but it takes off from there. And I think I'll have to take 2 incidents from the book to clarify what I mean by that.
Please, yeah.
I remember when I was 13 years old, 12 going on 13, and I first discovered UFOs, I imagined myself standing out on a cold night, and a cold starry night, and seeing a glowing red disk pass across the sky, very much like the orange object you've described to me. What you actually saw, I envisioned. I imagined myself as seeing. And I started the Journal of a UFO Investigator by asking myself, suppose I had seen it, and suppose it had come down to Earth. What would have happened then? And that was the starting point of the fiction in Journal of a UFO Investigator. Another was a dream I had when I was 15 years old, that I was in this rambling old farmhouse in the country with a group of highly serious teenagers like me, dedicated to exploring the mysteries on the fringes of science. And among them was a beautiful blonde in an evening dress. And then I woke up. In Journal of a UFO Investigator, I imagined what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. And how the protagonist, whom I call Danny Shapiro, and I can tell you, if you want, why I picked the name Danny Shapiro for my protagonist, who was kind of a stand-in for me. But Danny Shapiro is in that old house. There is a beautiful blonde, and she invites him to go on an adventure with her to find a lost book, which in fact is rooted in the actual legendary of UFOs. And this begins an odyssey, part of which takes place under the earth, part of which takes place in Jerusalem, and that ends with the disc crashing at Roswell, and Danny and his half-alien daughter being in it.
I must say, it's a beautifully presented book anyway, and it's very well laid out, and I think I'll advise anyone to get a hold of it. That's Journal of a UFO Investigator by David Halperin.
Yeah.
Very, very good. I'm actually pleased I've got a copy of it. It's actually quite an intriguing cover on the front. It's like a notebook. It's a notebook cover
right.
book. It's very good. But
because this is what Danny's writing.
Yeah, it is. It's very good. So when you give talks normally, what do you normally what's the source of your talks? What do you talk about normally?
Well, I think I normally don't give public lectures. I will be giving a paper actually next week at a Zoom meeting of the International Association for Jungian Studies, in which I will be talking about the William Booth Gill sighting of June 1959. I don't know if you recall that one.
I have heard a little bit about it, but I don't know too much about it, I must admit. Would you like to cover a little bit on here, or?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about it. That an Anglican missionary from Australia takes place at a mission on the coast of Papua New Guinea, and the man who's come down as the primary witness was an Anglican missionary named William Booth Gill, but he was joined in the experience by a couple of dozen of his Papuan parishioners. And what they saw was a number of discs that came down quite close to them, and they saw walking on the upper surface of one of those discs 4 men. Not greys, not spacemen, but 4 men. Gill said there is no doubt they are human, with exception of one odd detail, they were glowing, which human beings generally don't tend to do. And the spaceships approached as the clouds dispersed, and then they disappeared as the clouds thickened. That is what Gill saw, and that is what 25 out of, I think it was 38 Papuans who were present saw along with them, and they all signed their names to sketches of it. Now, I think we know what they were looking at. They were looking at the planets Jupiter and Saturn, and at the stars Rigel and another one, the name I do not recall. And the reason why I think we know this is that when they've plotted the locations of their UFOs, that they correspond quite closely to those bright heavenly objects. But if that was what they were looking at, it was not what they saw. And what I'm interested in is, why did they see what they saw? Which did not exist in physical reality, except in the sense that Jupiter and Saturn obviously exist, but came from within them. And how, and this is really, to me, this is the single most baffling question of UFOs in general. We do have multiply witnessed sightings of things that I would go so far as to say can't have been physically present. How does that work?
You've left my head spinning a little bit, I must admit. I'm beginning to wonder, what did I see now back then? But I'm still convinced it was a physical thing. But you made me wonder now.
I would make it, if I may, and I'm very hesitant about saying this, I would think you were looking at something and you saw something else. And what you saw was the UFO, and it came from inside you.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Even that makes me think, well, it still makes me wonder even more now, what was it I was seeing?
That is a great question. And I see we're coming toward the end of our time, but let me tell you a story that perhaps bears on.
No, we've got as much time as you want, David. It's, carry on, please tell the story.
Yeah, well, let's tell the story. That, I mean, we all have heard of John Lennon, right?
Yeah.
That he's probably one of the most famous men of the past century.
I'll say him and Elvis Presley, yeah, probably.
Yeah, though I think I would guess that Lennon that's possible. I would think Lennon outshone Presley, but I don't know. But in any case, he's one of the most famous. Most people don't know that he saw a UFO.
Yes, that's true.
That he was, at the time, he was separated. It was in August of 1974. He was separated from his wife, Yoko Ono. He was living with his assistant, who is now his girlfriend, his lover, May Pang, in a penthouse in Manhattan. This affair, by the way, was engineered by Yoko Ono. Neither Lennon nor Pang really seemed to have wanted it, but they played their roles in Yoko Ono's dance. And one time that Lennon used to hang around the apartment naked. And that's important. You'll see why that's important in a minute. And Pang had just finished showering, and she heard Lennon call out, May, come out here. And they went out to the terrace, and they saw a dome disc passing, I don't know, about 100 yards from them. And one of them got a camera, and they took a whole roll of pictures of this disc, which they both saw, and the roll turned out completely blank, as if there was nothing there, but they both did see it. And in almost all of their retellings of the story, they stressed that they were both naked. Now, here the old biblicist's mind starts spinning back. When was the last time a naked human couple stood before a numinous presence? And of course the answer is in the Garden of Eden, with Adam and Eve before the God who appears there in human form. And I think in Manhattan in 1974, in the form of a Jungian mandala. Now, what's going on here? I think that this is, I'll use Jung's words, an archetypal image which surfaced in antiquity, in the mind of the author of Genesis, and I think surfaced again in the experience of a professedly irreligious person, John Lennon, and his girlfriend.
That is very, very deep. Yeah.
Well, that's what we are.
Yeah, I know.
And that's what I think.
We are very deep.
That's what I think
us.
the UFOs are.
Yeah. Well, it's a very, as I say, you've certainly given me something to think about again, and I'm sure people out there, I'm sure we've had one or two people shouting at the, shouting at the radio, but it's been very, very fascinating, David, having you on, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's been fascinating. As I say, you've given me quite a lot of things to think about. But yeah, it's been brilliant, and I thank you for agreeing to come on. And I would advise anyone to go out and get your book, and it's called The Intimate Alien, the hidden truth of the UFO.
The hidden story.
Oh, sorry, the hidden story of the UFO. Yeah.
And if people would like to test the waters before they get the book, they might want to go to www.David Halperin, that's DAVID one word, .net, and they'll see more about the book, and they can look at my blog and get some sense of where I'm coming from and why I think UFOs are so important.
It's a very extensive blog as well. I've had a dig in and out of it. It's got some very interesting subjects on there, I must say, and some very interesting photos and everything. But another book I'd advise you to get, as I mentioned earlier, was Journal of a UFO Investigator. It's David's novel, which is based really on your true experiences. But right, I shall leave it there. Thank you very much, David, for coming on, and it's been great having you on.
Well, thank you so much for having me, David.
Good luck in your future endeavours.
Lovely, and good luck in yours.
And I shall keep an eye on what you're up to now. Thank you very much.
Do that.
And please stay in touch. Thank you very much, David. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You've been listening to Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm David Young, and thank you for listening. Good night. Bye-bye.
Unidentified flying objects, commonly known as flying saucers, do exist. Some kind of flying objects have been photographed in the sky. If they cannot be identified as objects known to man, what are they? If they are not man-made, who made them? If they are not from this planet, where are they from?
Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK radio network.